All right, chapter 16. If it's been maybe a few days since you listened to the last video and read chapters 14 and 15, just a reminder, Anne-Marie had a close call with the soldiers, but safely made it to the dock to her Uncle Henrik and delivered him his lunch with the packet in it. She still doesn't know what the packet is, but it was important for some reason. Well, we know that inside the packet was a handkerchief. We just don't know why that was important. All right, let's read 16 and 17. And then there's something at the end called an afterword that we're going to read, and then we'll be done. Chapter 16, I will tell you just a little. Poor Blossom, Uncle Henrik said, laughing at after dinner that evening. It was bad enough that your mother was going to milk her after all these years of city life, but Anne-Marie, to do it for the very first time, I'm surprised Blossom didn't kick you. Mama laughed too. She sat in a comfortable chair that Uncle Henrik had moved from the living room and placed in a corner of the kitchen. Her leg, and a clean white cast to the knee, was on a footstool. Anne-Marie didn't mind their laughing. It had been funny. When she had arrived back at the farmhouse, she had run along the road to avoid the soldiers who might still be in the woods now. Now, carrying nothing, she was in no danger. Mama and Kirsty were gone. There was a note hastily written from Mama that the doctor was taking her in his car to the local hospital, that they would be back soon. But the noise from Blossom, forgotten, unmilked, uncomfortable in the barn, had sent Anne-Marie warily out with the milking bucket. She had done her best, trying to ignore Blossom's irritated snorts and tossing head, remembering how Uncle Henrik's hands had worked with a firm, rhythmic, pulling motion, and she had milked. I could have done it, Kirsty announced. You only have to pull and it squirts out. I could do it easily. Anne-Marie rolled her eyes. I'd like to see you try, she thought. Is Ellen coming back? Kirsty asked, forgetting the cow after a moment. She said she'd make a dress for my doll. Anne-Marie and I will help you make a dress, Mama told her. Ellen had to go with her parents. Wasn't that a nice surprise that the Rosens came last night to get her? She should have waked me up to say goodbye, Kirsty grumbled, spooning some imaginary food into the painted mouth of the doll she had propped in a chair beside her. Anne-Marie, Uncle Henrik said, getting up from the table and pushing back his chair. If you come with me now to the barn, I'll give you a milking lesson. Wash your hands first. Me too, said Kirsty. Not you two, Mama said. Not this time. I need your help here, since I can't walk very well. You'll have to be my nurse. Kirsty hesitated, deciding whether to argue. Then she said, I'm going to be a nurse when I grow up, not a cow milker, so I have to stay here and take care of Mama. Followed as usual by the kitten, Anne-Marie walked with Uncle Henrik to the barn through a fine misty rain that had begun to fall. It seemed to her that Blossom shook her head happily when she saw Henrik and knew that she would be in good hands again. She sat on the stacked hay and watched while he milked, but her mind was not on the milking. Uncle Henrik, she asked, where are the Rosens and the others? I thought you were taking them to Sweden on your boat, but they weren't there. They were there, he told her, leaning forward against the cow's broadside. You shouldn't know this. You remember what I told you it was safer not to know. But he went on as his hands moved with their sure and practiced motion. I will tell you just a little, because you were so very brave. Brave? Anne-Marie asked in surprise. No, I wasn't. I was very frightened. You risked your life. But I didn't even think about that. I was only thinking of... He interrupted her, smiling. That's all that brave means, not thinking about the dangers. Just thinking about what you must do. Of course you were frightened. I was too today, but you kept your mind on what you had to do. So did I. Now let me tell you about the Rosens. Many of the fishermen have built hidden places in their boats. I have too, down underneath. I have only to lift the boards in the right place, and there is a room to hide a few people. Peter and the others in the Resistance who work with him bring them to me and to the other fishermen as well. There are people who hide them and help them along the way to Galilee. Anne-Marie was startled. Peter is in the Resistance? Of course, I should have known. He brings Mama and Papa the secret newspaper, Die Danske, and he always seems to be on the move. I should have figured it out myself. He is a very, very brave young man, Uncle Henrik said. They all are. Anne-Marie frowned, remembering the empty boat that morning. Were the Rosens and the others there then, underneath when I brought the basket? Uncle Henrik nodded. I heard nothing, Anne-Marie said. Of course not. They had to be absolutely quiet for many hours. The baby was drugged so that it wouldn't wake and cry. Could they hear me when I talked to you? Yes, your friend Ellen told me later that they heard you, and they heard the soldiers who came to search the boat. Anne-Marie's eyes widened. Soldiers came? She asked. I thought they went the other way after they stopped me. There are many soldiers in Galilee and all along the coast. They are searching all the boats now. They know that the Jews are escaping, but they are not sure how, and they rarely find them. The hiding places are carefully concealed, and often we pile dead fish on the deck as well. They hate getting their shiny boots dirtied. He turned his head toward her and grinned. Anne-Marie remembered the shiny boots confronting her on the dark path. Uncle Henrik, she said, I'm sure you are right that I shouldn't know everything, but please, would you tell me about the handkerchief? I knew it was important to pack it, and that's why I ran through the woods to take it to you, but I thought maybe it was a map. How could a handkerchief be important? He set the filled pail aside and began to wash the cow's udder with a damp cloth. Very few people know about this, Anne-Marie, he said with a serious look. The soldiers are so angry about the escaping Jews and the fact that they can't find them that they have just started using trained dogs. They had dogs, the ones who stopped me on the path. Uncle Henrik nodded. The dogs are trained to sniff about and find where people are hidden. It happened just yesterday on 2 boats. Those dogs, they go right through dead fish to the human scent. We were all very, very worried. We thought it meant the end of the escape to Sweden by boat. It was Peter who took the problem to scientists and doctors. Some very fine minds have worked night and day trying to find a solution, and they have created a special drug. I don't know what it is, but it was in the handkerchief. It attracts the dogs, but when they sniff at it, it ruins their sense of smell. Imagine that. Anne-Marie remembered how the dogs had lunged at the handkerchief, smelled it, and then turned away. Now, thanks to Peter, we will each have such a handkerchief, each boat captain. When the soldiers board our boats, we will simply pull the handkerchiefs out of our pockets. The Germans will probably think we all have bad colds. The dogs will sniff about, sniff the handkerchiefs we are holding, and then roam the boat and find nothing. They will smell nothing. Did they bring dogs to your boat this morning? Yes, not 20 minutes after you had gone. I was about to pull away from the dock when these soldiers appeared and ordered me to halt. They came aboard, searched, found nothing. By then, of course, I had the handkerchief. If I had not, well, his face trailed off and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. If she had not found the packet where Mr. Rosen had dropped it, if she had not run through the woods, if the soldiers had taken the basket, if she had not reached the boat in time, all of the ifs whirled in Anne-Marie's head. They are safe in Sweden now? She asked. You're sure? Uncle Henrik stood and patted the cow's head. I saw them ashore. There were people waiting to take them to shelter. They are quite safe there. But what if the Nazis invade Sweden? Will the Rosens have to run away again? That won't happen. For reasons of their own, the Nazis want Sweden to remain free. It is very complicated. Anne-Marie's thoughts turned to her friends hiding under the deck of the Ingeborg. It must have been awful for them, so many hours there, she murmured. Was it dark in the hiding place? Dark and cold and very cramped. And Mrs. Rosen was seasick, even though we were not on the water very long. It is a short distance, as you know, but they are courageous people, and none of that mattered when they stepped ashore. The air was fresh and cool in Sweden. The wind was blowing. The baby was beginning to wake as I said goodbye to them. I wonder if I will ever see Ellen again, Anne-Marie said sadly. You will, little one. You saved her life after all. Someday you will find her again. Someday the war will end, Uncle Henrik said. All wars do. Now then, he added, stretching, that was quite a milking lesson, was it not? Uncle Henrik, Anne-Marie shrieked, and then began to laugh. Look, she pointed, the god of thunder has fallen into the milk pail. Chapter 17, All This Long Time. The war would end. Uncle Henrik had said that, and it was true. The war ended almost 2 long years later. Anne-Marie was 12. Church bells rang all over Copenhagen early that May evening. The Danish flag was raised everywhere. People stood in the streets and wept as they sang the national anthem of Denmark. Anne-Marie stood on the balcony of the apartment with her parents and sister and watched. Up and down the street and across on the other side, she could see flags and banners in almost every window. She knew that many of those apartments were empty. For nearly 2 years now, neighbors had tended the plants and dusted the furniture and polished the candlesticks for the Jews who had fled. Her mother had done so for the Rosens. It's what friends do, Mama had said. Now neighbors had entered each unoccupied waiting apartment, opened a window, and hung a symbol of freedom there. This evening, Mrs. Johansson's face was wet with tears. Kirsty, waving a small flag, sang. Her blue eyes were bright. Even Kirsty was growing up. No longer was she a light-hearted chatterbox of a child. Now she was taller, more serious, and very thin. She looked like the pictures of Lisa at 7 in the old album. Peter Nielsen was dead. It was a painful fact to recall on this day when there was so much joy in Denmark. But Anne-Marie forced herself to think of her red-headed almost brother and how devastating the day was when they received the news that Peter had been captured and executed by the Germans in the public square at Rivingen in Copenhagen. He had written a letter to them from prison the night before he was shot. It had said simply that he loved them and that he was not afraid and that he was proud to have done what he could for his country and for the sake of all free people. He had asked in the letter to be buried beside Lisa. But even that was not to be for Peter. The Nazis refused to return the bodies of the young men they shot at Rivingen. They simply buried them there where they were killed and marked the graves only with numbers. Later, Anne-Marie had gone to the place with her parents, and they had laid flowers there on the bleak, numbered ground. That night, Anne-Marie's parents told her the truth about Lisa's death at the beginning of the war. She was part of the resistance too, Papa had explained, part of the group that fought for our country in whatever ways they could. We didn't know, Mama added. She didn't tell us. Peter told us after she died. Oh, Papa, Anne-Marie cried. Mama, they didn't shoot Lisa, did they? The way they did Peter in the public square with people watching? She wanted to know it all, but wasn't certain she could bear the knowledge. But Papa shook his head. She was with Peter and others in a cellar where they held secret meetings to make plans. Somehow the Nazis found out and they raided the place that evening. They all ran different ways trying to escape. Some of them were shot, Mama told her sadly. Peter was shot in the arm. Do you remember that Peter's arm was bandaged and in a sling at Lisa's funeral? He wore a coat over it so that no one would notice, and a hat to hide his red hair. The Nazis were looking for him. Anne-Marie didn't remember. She hadn't noticed. The whole day had been a blur of grief. But what about Lisa, she asked. If she wasn't shot, what happened? From the military car, they saw her running and simply ran her down. So it was true, what you said, that she was hit by a car. It was true, Papa told her. They were all so young, Mama said, shaking her head. She blinked, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a long, deep breath. So very, very young, with so much hope. Now, remembering Lisa, Anne-Marie looked from the balcony down into the street. She saw that below, amid the music, singing, and the sound of the church bells, people were dancing. It brought back another memory, the memory of Lisa so long ago, wearing the yellow dress, dancing with Peter on the night that they announced their engagement. She turned and went to her bedroom, where the blue trunk still stood in the corner, as it had all these years. Opening it, Anne-Marie saw that the yellow dress had begun to fade. It was discolored at the edges where it had lain so long in folds. Carefully, she spread open the skirt of the dress and found the place where Ellen's necklace lay hidden in the pocket. The little Star of David still gleamed gold. Papa, she said, returning to the balcony, where her father was standing with the others, watching the rejoicing crowd. She opened her hand and showed him the necklace. Can you fix this? I have kept it all this long time. It was Ellen's. Her father took it from her and examined the broken clasp. Yes, he said, I can fix it. When the Rosens come home, you can give it back to Ellen. Until then, Anne-Marie told him, I will wear it myself. The end. I think there were lots of interesting reveals in that chapter. The story wraps up pretty nicely. Obviously, Ellen and Anne-Marie haven't been reunited yet, and knowing the truth about Lisa and Peter's deaths are sad. So there's a mixture of sadness and happiness, I think, at the ending of this book, which is what one of the topics is for your journal assignment this week in grammar, to deal with that idea of how the ending is both happy and sad. And I'll talk about that in the grammar lesson. But overall, I mean, it's an amazing story and a happy story that so many of the Jews were saved from the fate that most European Jews faced during World War II and the Holocaust. And what we're going to read next here is the afterword that the author wrote to give some historical background to this story, because although Number the Stars is a fictional story, the characters aren't real and the specific events are not real. the historical background with World War II and invading Denmark, and how the Danish people helped the Jews flee to Sweden, that all actually is true. And so we're going to read about what really happened in Denmark here in the afterword. It's pretty incredible. All right, so we're in the afterword here, page 133. How much of Anne-Marie's story is true? I know I will be asked that. Let me try to tell you here where fact ends and fiction begins. So again, this is the author now, Lois Lowry, writing this afterword. Well, she wrote the whole book, but this is her speaking now. Anne-Marie Johansen is a child of my imagination, though she grew there from the stories told to me by my friend Anneliese Platt, to whom this book is dedicated, who herself was a child in Copenhagen during the long years of the German occupation. I had always been fascinated and moved by Anneliese's descriptions, not only of the personal deprivation that her family and their neighbors suffered during those years and the sacrifices they made, but even more by the greater picture she drew for me of the courage and integrity of the Danish people under the leadership of the king they loved so much, Christian X. So I created little Anne-Marie and her family, set them down in a Copenhagen apartment on a street where I have walked myself, and imagined their life there against the real events of 1943. Denmark surrendered to Germany in 1940. It is true, and it was true for the reasons that Papa explained to Anne-Marie. The country was small and undefended, with no army of any size. The people would have been destroyed had they tried to defend themselves against the huge German forces. So, surely with great sorrow, King Christian surrendered, and overnight the soldiers moved in. From then on, for 5 years, they occupied the country. Visible on almost every street corner, always armed and spit-shined, they controlled the newspapers, the rail system, the government, schools, and hospitals, and the day-to-day existence of the Danish people. But they never controlled King Christian. It is true that he rode alone on his horse from the palace every morning, unguarded, and greeted his people. And though it seems so charming as to be a flight of the author's fancy, the story that Papa told Anne-Marie of the soldier who asked the Danish teenager, "Who is that man?" that story is recorded in one of the documents that still remain from that time. It is true, too, that in August 1943, the Danes sank their own entire navy in Copenhagen harbor as the Germans approached to take over the ships for their own use. My friend Anneliese remembers it, and many who were children at the time would have been awakened, as little Kirsty was, by the explosions in the fiercely lighted sky as the ships burned. On the new year of the Jewish high holidays in 1943, those who gathered to worship at the synagogue in Copenhagen, as the fictional Rosens did, were warned by the rabbi that they were to be taken and relocated by the Germans. The rabbi knew because a high German official told the Danish government, which passed the information along to the leaders of the Jewish community. The name of that German was G.F. Duckwitz, and I hope that even today, so many years later, there are flowers on his grave because he was a man of compassion and courage. And so the Jews, all but a few who didn't believe the warning, fled the first raids. They fled into the arms of the Danes, who took them in, fed them, clothed them, hid them, and helped them along to safety in Sweden. In the weeks following the Jewish New Year, almost the entire Jewish population of Denmark, nearly 7,000 people, were smuggled across the sea to Sweden. The little hand-hemmed linen handkerchief that Anne-Marie carried to her uncle, surely something made up by an author who wanted to create a heroine out of a fictional little girl. No, the handkerchief as well is part of history. After the Nazis began to use police dogs to sniff out hidden passengers on the fishing boats, Swedish scientists worked swiftly to prevent such detection. They created a powerful powder composed of dried rabbit blood and cocaine. The blood attracted the dogs, and when they sniffed at it, the cocaine numbed their noses and destroyed temporarily their sense of smell. Almost every boat captain used such a permeated handkerchief, and many lives were saved by the device. The secret operations that saved the Jews were orchestrated by the Danish resistance, which, like all resistance movements, were composed mainly of very young and very brave. Peter Nielsen, though he is fictional, represents those courageous and idealistic young people, so many of whom died at the hands of the enemy. In reading of the resistance leaders in Denmark, I came across an account of a young man named Kim Malthe-Brun, who was eventually captured and executed by the Nazis when he was only 21 years old. I read his story as I had read many others, turning the pages, skimming here and there, this sabotage, that tactic, this capture, that escape. After a while, even courage becomes routine to the reader. Then, quite unprepared, I turned the page and faced a photograph of Kim Maltha-Brun. He wore a turtleneck sweater and his thin, light hair was windblown. His eyes looked out at me, unwavering on the page. Seeing him there, so terribly young, broke my heart. But seeing the quiet determination in his boyish eyes made me determined, too, to tell his story, and that of all the Danish people who shared his dreams. So I would like to end this with a paragraph written by that young man in a letter to his mother the night before he was put to death. And I want you all to remember that you must not dream yourselves back to the times before the war, but the dream for you all, young and old, must be to create an ideal of human decency, and not a narrow-minded and prejudiced one. That this is the great gift of our country, that our country hungers for, something every little peasant boy can look forward to, and with pleasure feel he is a part of, something he can work and fight for. Surely that gift, the gift of a world of human decency, is the one that all countries hunger for still. I hope that this story of Denmark and its people will remind us all that such a world is possible. The end. Isn't that amazing, though, the story of how the Danish people worked together to rescue their Jewish population? It's such a good example of people loving one another and overlooking prejudice. Most countries in Europe at this time didn't really care what the Nazis were doing to their Jewish population. Most people were pretty prejudiced toward Jews at this time. There were a lot of people that did care and did help, but not on the scale that the whole community of the Danes, like how the Danes did. And it's so incredible that that story is true. 7,000 Jewish people, almost every single one of them made it to safety in Sweden. Almost none of the Jewish, actually, I'm pretty sure even if they didn't escape to Sweden, they still didn't end up dying. I'm pretty sure that no Danish Jews died during the Holocaust. And that's incredible because I believe the Jewish population of Europe before World War II was like around 9 million. And after World War II, 6 million Jews had been killed. So like 2/3 of the Jewish population of Europe was killed during the Holocaust. So the fact that all of the Danish Jews survived is just an incredible story. I hope you found this book enjoyable. I hope it kept your attention, and I hope you found it inspiring too. I love it. There is, if we were in class, there is a movie that I like to show that's not the same as Number the Stars, but there are a lot of similarities. I am going to talk to you about that in a separate Nearpod slide, but the movie is called Miracle at Midnight, and I'm going to give you some different ways that hopefully maybe you can still watch it from home, because I think it's worthwhile for you to watch now that you've finished the book. Well, you've got one final quiz to take for Number the Stars, and then you've got the journal assignment that I will give you in the grammar lesson. But that completes our final novel of the year, and I hope you enjoyed it. I know that I did.